So Matt, it's absolutely a pleasure to do this with you. I know it's taken so long. But how is the campaign trail? Like can you tell me what you've been kind of doing all summer and into the fall?
Well, it's been an enormous amount of effort. The delight of doing this is I end up learning an enormous amount about not only in terms of the issues, although there's plenty of that, but also just how to manage a campaign where everything is all in. There's no halfway about this. We either win or we lose. I mean, it's a very binary choice in that sense. And given the consequences, if we lose, it's added an urgency to it that perhaps I didn't feel quite this way. But after seeing how the last 2 years have evolved in state in general and the legislature in particular, and it's convinced me, as well as it has countless other people here in our two towns, that we have to win this. I mean, we don't have a choice. We must win this. And so that's really what's consumed the summer. And I told my wife that was going to be the case, that I was going to be AWOL for large periods of time, that I would disappear. And I said, you can find me. I'll be out in the street somewhere, knocking on doors. And so that's proven to be really educational when I've knocked on those doors. People have been wanting to engage. People will come to the door and I'll give my little spiel, which canvassing is typically 5 minutes and then move on to the next person. A lot of people weren't happy with that, so they said, no, I have questions for you. I need to have you answer a few of these. And so that's been really great. I mean, I love that to death. And when people want to engage, they have some questions about the current, Roe v. Wade or electrical, which I hope that talk about today as well, or whatever the particular bent is. Sometimes I agree with, sometimes I don't, but they always get heard. And so that's been really a lot of fun. The folks have been extraordinarily generous in terms of financial support, which I take as a barometer, crude though it may be, that a lot of people are very concerned about this, and so they're willing to ante up to a local candidate, where down ballot races do not get funding typically, but we got a lot of funding this year.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. I know that's probably one of the hardest things to do out there. What can I ask you from just if you're coming to my house, what makes you want to do this? Because from my perspective, here in New Hampshire, I believe representatives only get paid like $200 a year,
Not even
per session. Not even
per session. Yeah. Yeah, we do
so.
get mileage. We do get mileage.
Oh,
So
well,
there is that.
that's good. That's good. I mean, there's a little bit of mileage there, but what makes somebody like, I feel like New Hampshire itself is pretty limited on like who can go represent their people, right? I mean, it's pretty much like retired people, people that don't have to like work all day. It's so limiting. But what makes you want to give up your free time to go and like, represent people?
Well, and you're right. It is very skewed towards the older white population, of which New Hampshire is predominantly. So my reasons for doing that have to do with that. It's really, really interesting knowing the backstory of how bills get created, the considerations. The language of the bills can be quite obtuse, and so you have to, it's a lot of double negatives. Thou shalt not except on Tuesdays, in which case you can, but only with these provisions. And so there's a lot of that kind of language, and so parsing out that kind of detail is really fascinating. I really also enjoy the process of just connecting with people about issues that are really important to them, and they don't have any other means to express that. So I've become a sounding board, a sponge, if you will, for what they have to say. And I get connection with people that I wouldn't otherwise have. And my whole career has been one of connecting with people. I mean, as a nurse, and that's what I did. I mean, at one point, I had 46 staff reporting to me, and a cardiac unit that had 35 beds. I mean, it was all about connection and all about reading emotional signals, all about, dealing with technical matters in a fluid way. Later when I joined the corporate staff as a corporate safety director, and I had over 2,000 locations that I was indirectly responsible for. Well, no man alive can do 2,000 locations. And so it required connections. And so this whole campaign is about those connections and getting inside, working with both parties, working with anybody who's got a agile brain and a lot of creative thought about how to craft a bill to get the best result. It's entertaining.
I can understand all those points. Providing service, and helping out your community is probably for a lot of people paramount, right?
Oh, it's a huge amount. I mean, I did service in the Peace Corps, and trying to get a third world country to move forward. And my particular project was a septic system that was being overrun and flowing into the bay. So getting them to move on such a dire issue required more than backhoes and engineering. It required people to say this is a real problem for that area. And that same sort of interaction is the same here locally. And I sponsored, along with Jack Bingham, a bill here, just presented a petition, if you will, to the local select board at the time on issues that constituents brought to me, about backyard shooting, and that the 5-year-old couldn't play in the backyard because of all these high-powered weapons next door. And so the premise of the petition, which ultimately failed because of the select board we had at the time, had to do with establishing a committee to try to walk through this kind of problem. And I did not profess to have a solution to that. What I was trying to do is get democracy to work. So getting that sort of structure in place so people could actually talk to each other was a great thing. And I had a couple constituents after that all passed and died an ugly death. I had a number of constituents come up that were gun owners. One was a former cop. Said, he says, I agree to your stance. He said, and it's unfortunate that happened the way it did. He said, but you got the conversation started. And
it's a hard conversation though, because so I've lived here in New Hampshire for about 4.5 years. Before that, I was in the Air Force, and so I had to move around. But I've been to a lot of places, and New Hampshire is very unique in a lot of ways about the way they talk and handle their guns here. Not in like a bad way, but just like it seems to be a lot more people that are passionate about the gun situation here. And for me, I'm not all about buying the guns back and banning them and all. I mean, I feel like there has to be some kind of middle ground where we can have safety and we can have reason. But it seems like there's a small population. If you go to Reddit and you read r/New Hampshire, there's some crazy stuff in there. I don't know if you get to see that, but a lot of it's either the guns. Lately, it's been Roe versus Wade, the abortion topics, and so many other high power conversations. Where do you start as a politician? What is your number one platform that you go to somebody's house and they open up that door and you say, hey, I'm at town, I'd like to talk to you? What's their first, is it guns? Is it something else?
No, I think to get the dialogue started, I have to introduce myself, I should say. And sure. I say, look, I'm running for the legislature and I'm going around the neighborhood just introducing myself and allowing you to educate me on what is important to you. And so I pause for a moment, and sometimes you know why I have nothing to say. So, well, I think there are some important things to talk about, and Roe v. Wade being one of them. But you can read the body language. And, if they sort of lean into the conversation, then we talk about the Fourth Amendment. We talk about the right to privacy and unreasonable search and seizures. That's what formed the basis of the original Supreme Court decision, 50 years ago. And so when I say there's actually Supreme Court rationale for doing what we did. And, I talked about how the Democrats dropped the ball when we had majorities in both houses. We didn't codify it. We can't make that mistake again, but that's, all part of how things evolve. And people start to engage when they realize that this is not just a spurious decision by the Supreme Court 50 years ago. It's actually grounded in the Constitution and in the Bill of Rights. So, or I should say the amendments. And so there's a whole process of reading the body language, and I'll ask questions. You're happy with the electric bill? And they all get sort of inflamed about that, as one would when it doubles in a month. And say, look, this is all these are examples of what we can do better, and I need your support to be able to do better. And so at that point, they're starting to nod, that there's a rationale for this. So when I have a conversation around guns, something that is so emotionally laden and has so many trigger points, I said, I start out by taking their big objection off the table, which is to say, I don't care how many guns they have. They can have 1,000 guns. I have hobbies too. They're not guns, but I collect things that one might scratch their head about. So let's not talk about that piece, because we agree on that piece. But I think we can agree that if I go off the deep end and threaten my wife and I have a weapon, then maybe I ought not to have that weapon until my head gets sorted out by the appropriate professionals. And people say, well, yeah. I said, there's an area of agreement. We can have red flag laws, and they're straightforward to implement. And you get the occasional person who says, well, this is my property and the state shouldn't take it away. Okay, that doesn't mean that you can be a threat to our society either. And you get a weapon back when you're clear mentally. And I talk about how it's a felony to falsely report, and so that's a big club. If somebody tries to get at you by falsely reporting, that's a felony, Class B felony. So that's a big deal, and they sort of relax about that. So what I try to do is take some of that emotional steam out of that discussion and talk about something I think would actually happen. And I've had countless discussions with folks, on Facebook or other chat forums, and I make the offer, and I make the offer here now to everybody that might be watching this in the future. If you want to meet with me face to face, let's do that. And I've met with a dozen or so really adamant gun owners over a cup of coffee or lunch, and say, okay, here we are. Tell me what you think. And by the end of the meal or the coffee, we'll come up with 4 or 5 things that we both agree on. But eliminates that social media, curtain. When you have to face somebody, face to face, then your childhood teachings from your mother about how to be courteous and polite sort of kick in, and people start to talk. And that's been really productive.
Yeah, I agree. On social media, we tend to egg each other on. It's just a snowball effect of, see, I told you I'm right. Oh, let me correct you. You're wrong. I'm right. I see a lot of that, especially on Facebook and Reddit and those conversational platforms. But the gun thing, it is a little crazy. I mean, I don't know if you read Reddit very much, but there's multiple subreddits for New Hampshire. Like there's / NH guns, and then there's New Hampshire, and then there's NH politics. There's a lot of them. A lot of people are having some conversations online, and I try to dig into like the little areas to see what they're saying. And you were just talking about people not wanting to give their weapons up, in certain situations. But I see that a lot, where my neighbor is firing off his rifle or his semi-automatic in the backyard, and I can't sleep at night. And it's just like, it's amazing of how little consideration it seems that some people have developed over the last few years, where it's more of a binary, I win, you lose. And I think it feels to me like it's affecting a lot of people's, not only just relationships, but their views into the world. We've become a lot more tribal. I think that's probably pretty obvious for a lot of people.
And I would agree with that. The willingness to go nuclear right out of the gate, and people get right in my face when this, oh yeah, the guy did the gun petition, or you're in favor of abortion rights. They get right in my face and immediately start with the attack mode. And for those folks, there's really no immediate solution to that. I mean, they have underlying health issues, mental health issues that I'm not going to be able to resolve standing on the doorstep.
Right.
But I think just because they're loud doesn't mean that they're the majority. and no matter what forum we sort of dip our toes into to figure out what they're talking about, the canvassing has convinced me over and over and over again. I can't think of how many doors I've knocked on in the last 6 years. There's a lot more reasonable people, a lot more grounded people, a lot more folks who, when they get up in the morning, they're trying to make that piece of the world better. And those are our saviors, if you will. I know that the walk list that I'm given by the state Democratic Party, Democrats who don't always vote, in all the independents, and Republicans who sometimes vote Democratic. And so the feeling is that I will have the most contact with people who we might capture their vote, might come across as reasonable. And so these are the people who are more likely to sort of take me to task about one thing or another. And amazingly enough, that if you can take the initial heat off and just explain your point of view, even if you don't get agreement, you get somebody saying, okay, I don't agree with your point of view, but I understand how you got there. And I count that as a raging success, because we can develop that further going forward.
Is there any kind of evidence that allows you to kind of look deeper into your canvassing operations to see if it's actually paying dividends? Like, I feel like a lot of people would give you lip service. Like, you show up at my house and you're like, I'm so and so, and I believe in this, and everybody's like, yeah, and they get off my property. But have you can you point to a moment where it's actually like convinced somebody to come over to your side?
Yeah, I can. And the giveaway for that is body language. When they leaned into the conversation, just to make sort of the starkest comparison, and there are times I knock on the door and somebody comes to the door, they don't open the door. They're staring at me through glass. And so I'll start my little spiel, and you can see them body language is backing away. Their eyes avert. And when I hold up my little palm card for the information about myself, they'll open the door that much, and I'll slide it in almost like this is some sort of clandestine drug deal, and so then they sort of start closing the door. So that's one extreme. The other aspect is when somebody opens the door and you can see they want to bolt, they're in the middle of dinner, or they have a child screaming in the background, whatever, and the situational circumstances such as you say, okay, I can understand now is a bad time for you, and so you kind of truncate the conversation and give them, and maybe one guy asked me to come back, which was sort of a watershed moment. But the other piece when people are receptive is when they open the door and they view you with suspicion because I'm a tall, older, somewhat chunky white guy, knocking on the door, and they will say, yes, can I help you? I said, well, maybe, but I'm really here to help you. And then they don't expect that, because now I'm offering them something. And now they're starting to engage, in a way that I have a limited window. I have to make the point quickly. The old famous elevator speech. When you've got 30 seconds to make your impression, it is kind of like that. And if I can get them to respond, then we can have a dialogue. And let me take this a little bit off track, just to illustrate. Yeah. I used to work at the New Hampshire State Hospital when I wore a much younger man's clothes. And as part of my duties there as a psychiatric aide, we had a class that was for chronically mentally ill patients who have been on the back wards of the New Hampshire Hospital for decades, literally decades. And so nobody ever talked to them. I've never spoken to them, and they had lost the ability to communicate even the most basic needs of hunger and toiletry and all that. And so they just sort of sit there, and that's how the day after day after day went. So we started this group called the Remotivation Group. How we came up with that, I'm not real clear, but nonetheless. So you'd have 15 to 20 of these folks sit around in a circle, and you try to get a response from them in any way, any response. It's a nice day, and most of them would sit. Did you get up this morning? And they kind of look at you. What did you have for breakfast? Did you have the pancakes this morning? The pancakes are really great. And then perk up all of that. And the moment you get somebody to say anything, it might only be a grunt. Hey, you agree with that? That's great. And let's talk about. And so you pour this enormous emotional energy into that conversation. And over time, measured in terms of weeks or even months, you get a few people raise their hand a little bit and have something to say. And then, you build on that. That gives the others courage to also speak up. The point behind all of this is that that's kind of like what canvassing is you pour this enormous energy into the front part of the conversation with the hopes you get a response. And when you do, you build upon that response. And that's so people start feeling comfortable about being heard. And they'll take that conversation wherever they will. A number of folks will take me to task about, the old saw that I don't agree with, but nevertheless is out there, that Democrats are tax to spend. And so they say, well, you guys just want to spend my money. Well, yeah.
Well, it's true to some degree, right? I mean, we want to spend that money.
We do. And how we spend it is what we're really discussing. And that shift that we just did, we agreed that we want to spend your money. It's my money too. But we want to talk about how it gets spent. Do we invest it in a way that saves us money? Such as in our electrical grid. Do we invest it in winterization projects, which saves us fuel oil and money? So so we're not really talking about whether or not we're going to spend your money. Because I'm here to tell you, we will spend your money. But the Republicans are too. So let's not be unfair about this. How do you want to see your money spent? If you have a leak in your roof, do you repair it? Of course you do. Let me tell you about the photographs I saw of the plow trucks, the New Hampshire plow trucks, that they can't fund new trucks. And the floorboards are completely rotted out, and they're still using these trucks. Now, should we buy new trucks? Is that a good use of your money? They're expensive, but they're kind of necessary, and so then we shift the dialogue to one of proactive. How do we engage? How do we make something good happen with that money? It's a very different conversation.
I think it is. It's a very nuanced situation because a lot of people don't understand how taxes work. And, I tell my kids this all the time. If you make enough money to pay taxes, you should be proud of that. You should be proud of putting money back into your community. You should be proud that you contributed to projects, whether it's the plow trucks you're talking about or the new roads that go out in front of your house so you can go to work. I feel like I've been seeing a lot of ads this cycle about say like Maggie Hassan, out in Washington doing careless spending. I don't know of one senator or one representative that gets to choose like all the spending. It's usually a pretty collaborative effort. And I don't think there's been anything crazy this year or even last year that would justify those kind of fear-mongering tactics of we're spending too much money carelessly in Washington. And I think it applies at the state levels too, right? Because if somebody thinks that you're in Washington just willy-nilly, giving out tax money, like I would argue 4 years prior to that, we were giving out tax money like it was crazy and then not asking for it back.
Right.
And people, they really think that the tax money that they're contributing is significant enough where they have these voices and they can put these statements on political cards and saying, in other words, I don't feel like we're misspending our money. And
we're not.
I'm proud that I can contribute back to my community at a local, at a state, and at a federal level. And I just wish more people were proud of that. And I wish more people understood the financial aspect. I'm a prior federal employee, and one of my biggest jobs was I managed a multi-million-dollar budget for squadrons and groups and larger organizations. And we would get the same complaints, but those same people would never look into what that money was spent and how it was spent and how it actually affected them and their families and their people that worked for them. And I just feel like we're kind of in the same thing at the state level. And I don't know, those mailers really set me off the other day. But like, how do we convince people that taxes can be a positive instead of just don't tax me, bro?
I think that we have to take the ball to them in that regard. It's when they say, well, there's so much waste, the first thing I do is eliminate waste. And when I've had the conversation, and canvassing isn't always flowers and happy times. Occasionally I will make the conscious decision I'm going to lose this vote, and hopefully they start talking to the neighbors about this guy down, that came to his door and talking about taxing and spending, and he will be find himself confronted by his neighbors. Because what I'll say is, show me where that waste is. And I've been there. I've seen the budget get developed. Show me that. And so I'll set them up. And I don't mean this unkindly at all, but just to illustrate how money gets spent in a very conscious and deliberative way. I talked about a project that I was sponsor to, along with John Graham, who was the minority leader, the Republican minority leader of my committee. There was a proposal brought to us by the engineering staff, and they wanted to build a hydroelectric dam in Glen, New Hampshire. Now, there happens to be a nursing home in Glen, state run, and they are completely off the grid. They power their entire facility by generators, diesel generators, and they burn 1,000 gallons of fuel a week.
That's expensive.
And so, enormous amount of carbon, and diesel generators. They had to have 3, right? 2 would run, and one's the backup, for maintenance and that kind of stuff. So what they proposed was that there was water, a steady flowing river on their property that they could dam and generate all the hydropower that they would ever need, and potentially over the future dump some of that back into the grid. And so they proposed $2 million. Payback for that was 2 years. 2 years. And it's a wonderful payback, and so, I say, well, look, we wanted to build a hydroelectric dam for a nursing home. And say, oh, that's a great example of wasting money. Well, slow down. Let's talk about the details of this before you react. And then say, now, would you make that deal? I mean, if you had $2 million, would you invest it to get $1 million a year back in perpetuity a year? Well, yeah, that's what I see at the state level. I really do have more faith in our state structure, if you will, our actual government, not the representatives or senators or the like, but people who actually make these decisions, the engineering staff, and because they're trying to do the right thing. And we need to be able to support them in that. There isn't that waste. And so ultimately that bill made it into the HB2, which is the capital expense part of the budget, and get passed. So, when I set that up and we had that sort of next level of discussion, they come away with a different perspective and hopefully start to doubt their soundbite mentality going forward that, oh, that's all this waste, because they have at least one example where that wasn't true.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point by bringing up the soundbite mentality, because I do see it's more of a I won tonight. It's more of a I gotcha. See, you don't know what you're talking about, because people don't want to go in and see the details of a project and see what the benefits, that the benefits outweigh the negatives. And it's an unfortunate thing. It is in many ways like cutting your nose off, spite your face. It's just the lack of interest, the lack of engagement. Yeah, I see that a lot here. I interact with a lot of people here in New Hampshire if I'm somewhere and somebody brings it up or whatever. And it's amazing to me. Some people have it and a lot of people just couldn't be bothered. And I think that's kind of a scary thing. But you bring up a lot of good points.
Particularly in the humanities. I described the capital project as, nuts and bolts and concrete. But the humanities issues tends to be more problematic. Folks are very willing to say, well, they made bad decisions, so that's how they arrived there. And, it's not my job to bail them out of their own situation. And there is a video out there which really struck me, because it was a very powerful but short video. And it showed a line of young people. Some were Black, some were Hispanic, some were various ethnicities, men and women. And so the guy that was leading, this is a race, and the guy who was leading the whole adventure said, okay, so we're going to talk about how you got benefits in life through no fault of your own and no effort of your own. And so you advance. So he said, everybody whose parents stayed married, take 10 steps forward. So half a dozen people step forward. People who graduated high school take more steps forward. People who inherited money, or people who whose brothers and sisters stayed healthy, all during your childhood, so those resources weren't going elsewhere. And in various questions, different people would step forward, but there was a line of people who could answer none of those questions in the affirmative, and so they stayed at the baseline. And so what picture I want to paint is all these people scattered over a field, some who were well down the field through and had an advanced standing through no effort of their own. It was just life circumstances. And so if you're a black guy in the back of the room, you don't get advanced standing. And this is not your problem. You couldn't complete that and win the race because you started out at a very different place. And so that discussion, in the time it took me just to tell that, unfortunately, doesn't. I'm not allowed the time to say that often enough and well enough for people to say, my circumstance, my parents stayed married. I was in a small town in New Hampshire. I had a great high school education. It was demanding, and I was held accountable. All the things that I had no party to, but affected me. And but I look around and I see other circumstances, especially as a nurse, that people did not have that opportunity. So when we talk about placement in colleges, we talk about subsidized housing, food stamps, whatever the social humanitarian response is, we should consider where this person started from and why they're in the situation they're at. That is harder to convey.
I wish we could take some people that don't understand what you just described and bring them to locations where they could spend the day talking and engaging to people that never step forward. I've had that well, honestly, it was a privilege to meet people from different walks of life, different classes, different races. Just I had that, and I'm lucky because I saw people that came from pretty hard places and decided that in order to get a college education, they were going to put their life on their line for their country. In order to give their family health benefits, they would join the Army or the Marines. Like unfortunately, this is my comparison and my background, so I apologize for bringing up so much military stuff. But
it is your background.
This is what I've done for the last 25 years, and I got to see a lot of poor people join the military from all over, but I always seem to run into people from Texas, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, and a lot of other either completely red states or in a lot of cases purple or somewhat red states like New Hampshire. And I find that very interesting that a lot of people can't seem to open their eyes to the larger situation we have in our country. And just especially today, right? Like we have high inflation. Everybody's complaining about gas prices, but nobody wants to take the time to understand how we got here or how these things happen and what we are or are not doing for it. And I feel like a part of the country is trying to fix it and the other part is just waiting for it to all burn down so they can have power again. And I hate to feel that way because I feel like there's good people on everywhere. They just had different inputs to change their thoughts. And I'll give you a prime example. When I first joined the military, I was 18 years old, fresh off the bus. I had no college education or anything. And for 13 years, the NCOs that I had worked for, the sergeants and everything, convinced me that I was a Republican. I was a conservative. and I didn't know better. I didn't have any understanding. I went with it, and I feel like a lot of people get caught in that, right? It's team sport. It's, come on, we're all in this together. Let's
Right.
go.
Yeah.
And it wasn't
Right.
until maybe I hit about 35 years old where I started like taking the blinders off a little bit and understanding the world around me a little bit more. And it's scary to think that I was gaslit for 13 years of my life, maybe a little bit more. Um, and so, yeah, I feel like people like me that are either susceptible at an earlier age, or maybe you were raised with some of these thoughts. I don't know how we change them. I really don't, but I think it's starting to get to a point where it's becoming harmful for a lot of our communities.
Oh, it is very harmful. It is toxic. I toss around the word, some would say I shouldn't, but it's toxic masculinity, where it is about the win-lose factor. This
Yeah.
notion that I'm going to get in your face and I'll intimidate you until you back down. Well, that doesn't work well with me. And so the one response is to escalate further. And it does concern me. And I do think that that's a risk to our society at large and individually. Some of my fellow canvassers, only want to go out and canvass in pairs because they're concerned about meeting that guy at the door that is has issues, just to put it mildly. So we can't really address those that are that rabid. But I used to teach management classes for Taekwondo International. And one of the things I talk about in terms of change, that if you can envision the bell curve, all right? So if you envision the bell curve, you're going to get 30% of the people who are fully on board. They understand the issue, they're educated, they're motivated, and these people, you basically get out of their way and allow them to do a good thing and allow that to happen. The other side of that bell curve, say you have not 30%, these people will fight you tooth and nail, even if they don't understand what the issue is. You're the ones proposing it, so therefore they're against it, right? So those people you cannot save. But what you've got in the middle is another 40%. And that 40% is looking to see what you do, how you conduct your life, how you conduct your speech, and how you try to include and somehow positively influence the situation. That 40% is what we're voting on. Those are their independents. Those are the ones who will, go back and forth between the parties depending on the person or the issue at hand. And that's, it's not quite as hopeless when you think that 30% are already with you, and you're only really having to deal with the middle 40%, and that's really powerful. There's a book out by Malcolm Gladwell called The Tipping Point. I don't know if you read it,
Great
but
book. Great book. Same with Blink, by the way.
yes,
Since we're bringing him up, an
that's right.
excellent book.
I've read his whole series, sometimes several times. I've lost more books, tipping point books, because I give them out and I never get them back,
Same.
But that's okay, It's my contribution to society. But in the tipping point, he makes a point: you don't have to convince all the people; you have to convince the right people, and the ones who are the movers and shakers in our society. And so, you asked me why I run, because I want to be part of the movers and shakers. I want to be part of that solution. Not that I have some pearl of wisdom, but because I'm willing to put myself out there, and that will reach the 40%, and that's our battleground.
I think that is important, I appreciate the way you broke that down. When you go into, let's say you win November, you go in, like, what is your priorities as a candidate? Like, what do you see, like, our top 3 or whatever it is for you? Like, what do you want to get in there and try to hope to fix?
One of the key pieces, number one, is trying to solidify what we have for the next generation. And my vehicle for doing that is pay attention to our democracy. And we make things really hard to where I think the 50th most difficult state to vote in. it may be 48, 49, 58, but at the bottom of the list,
Still at the
nonetheless.
bottom.
Yeah, still at the bottom. And it's difficult to vote here in New Hampshire, where you have states like Oregon and Vermont, they've been doing mail-in voting for decades, and not a problem. There's no big claims of fraud or anything else. And so you get something in the mail, you fill your ballot, and you mail it back. Very straightforward. And even those who are working 2 jobs, which many people are nowadays, they can do that. When I canvass, I go into some areas in Barrington that are really, really rough. I mean, we're talking about porches falling off houses. We're talking about broken windows. We're talking about plastic on roofs. And, if they get something in the ballot box or get something in the mail, they're likely to send that back. But they're not going to get in the car and drive. Barrington, is what, 10 miles, and then they're not going to drive that. And so you lose that vote. And that can be game changing. So we asked what my priorities are, and that is to protect that democracy, make it easier to vote. And it doesn't mean, I won't get a lot of, blowback because there will be fraud and all that. And it hasn't been, never has been. It's a straw issue, and we need to move beyond there. So protected democracy is a big item. Certainly I want to co-sign with anybody, a co-sponsor, I should say, anybody who wants to get further into the weeds on Roe v. Wade. So we codify that. So we solidify that at 24 weeks with all the usual exceptions, fetal anomaly, rape, incest, all those things should be built in, take away the penalty for a physician. So let's solidify that. Let's stop making that such a hot button. Let's fix it and move on. And it's, I feel passionately about the way we got, way the Fourth Amendment, should have been upheld. But I'm also even more passionate that this is something we litigate, relitigate, and it makes everything poisonous. And people do devolve into these 2 camps, and never will the 2 meet. So I really that's a legislative issue that we need to solve and move on to things that are also biting us. The electrical rates I keep coming back to, but we can do better in all those things. Let's get some of this emotional stuff out of the way. The gun rights thing is similar. If we passed a red flag law, if we had 100% background checks, and a lot of those kinds of common sense, a 7-day waiting period protects veterans. They're the ones that are more likely to use a weapon on themselves because of PTSD and how they got to where they are. And that, I have a brother who suffered from his life with PTSD. Back then, when he came back from Vietnam, it was not part of the lexicon. I mean, he was just like, he needs time to get over it. Well, guess what? This is 30 years later, he's still not over it. So, this idea that, we can't do anything about guns. We can do things, and the gun folks can have their guns for hunting or target practice, whatever. But let's get these really toxic pieces off our plate. If we want to have a good meal, let's get the toxic crap off our plate, so we're not eating that. That's certainly a big item. I think there's much we can do regarding, I say electric rates. I live in a house that my wife and I designed and built. And it's a 5+ star energy efficient house. So our total energy spend is about $1,000 a year. And that's all our lights, all our heat, all cooking, all clothes drying, hot water. That's everything that requires energy. It's $1,000 a year. And so there's nothing magical about what we did, except we paid attention. We exceeded the Boca code by several orders of magnitude, because we taped every seam in this building. We caulked, and that's not exotic. That's just a lot of hard work. And so,
Right.
She and I did that. So all that money that we would have otherwise spent gets diverted into things, that, we're going to try to fund our grandchildren's education, college education. That's how the money gets paid forward. And when we talk about, Head Starts, that's a hell of a head start, to give a kid a college education.
Right. And to to give people an insight of what we're talking about here with the energy prices in particular. In New Hampshire, it was signed off, I think, last year. So every 6 months, our power companies can ask for a raise in their prices to our energy board, and our energy board can approve, deny, whatever. But they approved a 112% increase starting October or August 1st, 2022, for all residents of New Hampshire. My bill went from an average of $500 a month to $1,000 a
Oh
month.
my God.
I have 3 college kids, I got 2 high schoolers. It's a big house, so it's really not that absurd, because like you, I wanted to go energy efficient. So 2 years ago, I put in mini splits into my house to try to reduce my connection to fossil fuels and burning oil and stuff like that. I figured, well, the electricity would be cheaper, and fast forward 2 years ago, my investment and the state's incentives, right? So they put in a little bit of money as well. They're all gone. And the reason being is this is one of the few states that never went green.
Yes.
At every opportunity, this state has gone completely like, no, we're burning natural gas, we're burning diesel. Like, I don't know what happened in this state, but we just refuse to do the right thing.
Well, I can tell you,
at least in that regard.
And I can tell you the PUC, one of the people on the PUC that helps make that decision, the 112%, is a former oil executive. The other 4 on the PUC have zero energy industry experience. So you get somebody
surprise
completely minus the facts, and making these kinds of decisions. And Governor Sununu is also heavily invested, and his brother, in the oil industry. So that's what happened. And when I served in 2018 and 2019, we saw this coming. And we had 12 bills that would help mitigate, this rise that we just saw. And all 12 were vetoed, and we were not able to override the veto because Republicans all sided with the governor. And so that's how we got here. The Gulf of Maine project has, I went to a seminar in Maine some time ago. They have a potential of 280 gig of power in the Gulf of Maine. And these guys are amazing. They have figured out a way to make concrete float, because the Gulf of Maine is so deep, you can't anchor these windmills to the sea floor, if you will. And so they figured out a way to make concrete float, and they have 5 working windmills out there, prototypes, but they're working. And it took us 3 years, because in order to be part of that project, you have to get federal permission, because it's part of the shoreline, the 3-mile limit, international waters and all that kind of stuff. And so you had to get permission. And so the governor would not sign off on that. So 3 years, every session, they sent a letter urging him to do that. Finally, he did. And I went to his announcement thing in UNH, and he had the audacity to say that New Hampshire's leading the charge in wind power. People
Can I just piggyback on that just for a second? Because while we're addressing Governor Sununu and making absurd statements, one of my most famous statements that I listened to, I believe it was the 2019, or it could have been 18. I think it was 19. Anyway, he was on a public debate and literally said, we cannot legalize cannabis because of our opiate crisis. I couldn't think of a more out of touch state leader at that time. And of course, what you're saying right now, it is almost comical how awful it literally is. But it's not comical because it hurts people. And I don't know how we convince people that are voting for these types of leaders that they're being grifted, they're being gaslit, they're being hurt. Like, how do we push people from the team? Like, let's win. I'm so tired of winning, to let's actually help each other. How do we cross that bridge? Anyway, that's just a rhetorical question, but Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
No,
it's
no, and I totally get it. And every time I read stuff about Sununu, I cringe, and I think he trades, he's a personable guy. He knows how to work the crowd. He's physically, a handsome guy, so, he sort of trades on that, and he can walk into a crowd and make everybody feel like, they could have a beer with him. That's how he trades. And so, we are intellectually lazy. We don't hold him to account for what stuff he says.
yeah, I don't watch I don't watch his announcements or read them anymore because I just don't feel like there's any substance in them. I, I I hate to be, a negative Nancy in that regard. Just I've been here for long enough, and I read the bills. I follow the legislature. I follow the vetoes. I go to sessions in the Capitol. I do a lot of this stuff, and so when I see it, it hurts a little bit because my family's being affected. Simple things in life, and it all seems a little bit harder here in New Hampshire,
It
and
does, and it doesn't need to be.
it really doesn't feel like it needs to be. I can we go back to the Roe versus Wade as well? I feel like right now
Sure. Let me
such
just hold.
oh oh, you're on solar, aren't you? You're
I
on
am.
solar. It's so unfair. So unfair. I tried going solar, but the solar company ghosted me. They said that my roof wasn't big enough, and they never they never reached back. So unfortunately, I'm paying the full.
Ouch! 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 Ouch!
Yeah, well, you can't win them all.
No, you can't. No. So yeah.
Roe
So
versus
Roe.
Wade, they keep saying that it's a state issue, and I feel like my entire life, every time I hear a politician or somebody saying, "Well, leave it to the states; they know what's best," I feel like that is absolutely not true at all, and I feel like it's just a cop out of saying, "Hey, we need 50 opportunities to screw everybody over," essentially for each state. I just feel like I feel like I have different American rights, or my daughters do, here in New Hampshire versus California or somewhere else. I just feel like we have so many Americans that have different freedoms and choices, and we should all have the same choice. We should all have those same freedoms.
The word for that is situational.
Yeah.
You know.
So my question to you is this something that we really need to do at the state level, or is this a federal thing?
Well, it's really two questions there.
It
Should we
is.
have to do it at state level? We shouldn't have to, but I think we do have to. It is a federal issue, and there's a national decision that it should be just like voting rights, just like a lot of things that we take for granted when we cross state lines that would be protected because of Constitution. That's how that issue ought to be solved. Now, failing that, I would advocate that we have to do something here in the state to at least move that ball as far as we can. The hope is that we move that ball enough that we protect our own women and girls, here in our own state, but that it gets overridden by a national law that guarantees those same rights nationally. So do what we can when we can, and advocate for Maggie Hassan and Jean Shaheen to vote for that on a national level. And the cannabis issue is the same deal. Biden started doing that the other day. It's a small step, but in terms of optics, I think it was an important step.
I
And
agree.
having his DEA folks start to reconsider, the law on that, stop it from being a Class B felony. So this idea, what can we do to the state, and should we find it necessary? Yeah, it is necessary enough because that's our only tool.
I agree. I feel like a lot of people leverage it's a state rights issue so they can manage it more Microscopically, it's harder to pass stuff on a national level, but it's easier to manage people's rights on a smaller scale.
Well, consider this. Let me jump in there. And when you
Sure.
consider that voting, if very few people vote, it favors Republicans. If a lot of people vote, it favors Democrats. And that's the same thing when you talk about state versus national. On a state level, there's a lot fewer voters, and they can be managed and gaslit and whipped up into a frenzy on more easily on a state level than if you try to get Arizona, California, Oregon, and Florida to agree on anything. So this idea that that's why they want to move to the states, because they will have more control over that population and be able to manipulate in a very nefarious way the outcome. And this whole gerrymandering thing that we've been railing about now forever, we tried to get a commission to manage the whole process so that there wouldn't be undue politics being played. And of course, that was nixed by the Republicans. Why? Because they could, because the voting pool, they made the voting pool much smaller. And in Barrington and Strafford, they manipulated that so that my opponent is more likely to get elected. So, that's sort of a longer answer to that. But if they move to the states level, they'll be able to swing that much further right.
That's scary. That is scary. I know for any right leaners that might be watching us later in the future, they're probably like, yes, but they don't realize what that's going to come back. And I know a lot of people are very one topic, focused, whether it's abortion or guns or something like that. It's such a scary thing when you. Speaking of, Roe versus Wade, and you're out there canvassing right now, how much is that affecting the conversations that you're having with?
A lot. There is a huge support for Roe v. Wade. And what I take some measure hide in as a guy is that the men are just as upset as the women about that. So when a guy comes to the door and says, well, and I don't know if it affects you particularly, but Roe v. Wade will certainly be on the ballot in a way that demonstrates who we elect. And so many guys have taken me to task on that. No, it is really important to me too. I had daughters, and I have a wife who should have that. I mean, they not only disallow me of that, but they're assertively disallowing me of that. So no, it is important to me as the family guy, if you will. So it is covering the conversations a lot, and it is a motivator. And I won't know until November 8th how many people are motivated to get out there and vote this issue. But we have a number of email trees, if you will, communications in the background, people advocating, coming out to vote, and that is the easiest soundbite to get.
That's actually a scarier one. So our last 3 elections here locally in our county, we had, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pulling this out of my mind, but the first one was in 2020, it was a 21% turnout. In 2021, it was a 23%. And then our last town vote, our county vote, whatever it was only 25% of a turnout.
Yeah.
I understand people have to work and there's daycare issues and there's everything else, but other than screaming at the top of your lungs, like, hey, it's super important that you get there and just cast that vote, whether it's mail-in or in person or whatever. I just don't know how. I've never seen it above, I don't know, probably 30% since I've been here.
Well, the election, the presidential election was up around 60%. But that's an anomaly. But you're absolutely right. The usual number is less than 30%. And we can't maintain a democracy with those kind of numbers. No, people don't have a flesh in the game. And I have Republicans that I will canvass, and I said, well, are you going to vote? After we both agreed that we don't agree on a bunch of stuff. I said, and I'll tell them, I said, do you plan on voting? And they'll say yes. I say, great. We don't agree on much, but I want you to vote. You should have some flesh in the game. And that always catches them sort of off guard. Like, you're a Democrat advocating for a Republican to vote. Well, I am, because that's how democracy, that's how it works.
Right. It's got to start somewhere, right? And casting
Right.
that vote is definitely part of that. So I'll make a little plea to any parents out there, whether you live here or elsewhere. Uh, we go as a family to vote. So I
Right.
have two voting adults, as children, and then I have a third one coming up next year. So he will be voting in 2024, and we vote together. It's a pride thing. We all walk out of the voting, area with the I voted sticker, and we go do the whole thing. Because as a parent, I'm trying to one, show my children like this is a very valuable part of where we live. Like, in a lot of ways, we're lucky to have been born in the United States, right? We've been born in our situation. We had no control over this. So I just feel like I want to make the most of it, but I also want to raise adults that are going to contribute to their community and their state and their federal, and voting is a large part of that. I didn't understand how important that was. My parents didn't have that opportunity to do that with me, but I feel like I have the opportunity. And I hope most parents out there listening to this would do this. If your kids turn 18 and they live around you, they live with you, whatever the situation, pick them up, put them in the car, go vote together, whether you vote the
Yes.
same or not, whatever, but just get them voting and get them used to the process.
Even the 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, bring them. They're allowed in the voting booth,
Sure.
and so they can see. It takes some of the mystique away from all that.
Yeah.
And I totally agree. My kids always went to vote with us, and our voting structure was a little weird, only because we're in the kids' early days. We were both nurses, and so trying to find a time when we could leave duty long enough to pick up the kids and go to vote was problematic. And that gets back to my point that if this was done by mail, all that would go away. Be easy to do.
I get nervous about mail voting, and the reason why I won't do it is because I'm afraid. I'm afraid that the poll workers have been compromised, and maybe my vote gets dropped into a trench somewhere, or doesn't get counted in some way. But I feel like when I go, and this is also a conservative talking point that I disagree with, but I understand where the concern comes from, because we don't have custody in the chain of that vote when it's through the mail for some people. I mean, I wish we didn't live in a world where we were questioning mail voting, because I would love to just fill it out and mail it in and just know that it's been counted. But because there's so many questions, and now, like for instance, this morning before this broadcast, I read that the GOP is training thousands of people to work elections, and that concerns me. You would think that it wouldn't, but it really does
Yeah,
concern me,
yeah, it
because they're
should.
not doing it out of the kindness of the heart. They're
Yeah.
doing it to change the course of our democracy. Before we get too lost in there, I do have more Roe versus Wade that I want to jump through.
Sure.
And this one I'm going to take for a little bit of a turn, because our country has been changing over the last couple decades, and we're starting to see a decline in religious followings, and I'm seeing less cars. And this is anecdotal, but like when I drive by a church on a Sunday morning, there's a lot less cars in those parking lots than there used to be. But our abortion is somehow tied to a large part of like Christianity and stuff like that. And it's not based in medical science or anything else. And most people probably don't even read the book, to be honest, but they follow the religion, and it's driving a lot of the situations we have from state to state. How do we one, take religion out of this, and just try to legislate, health wise and everything else? How do you manage the religious aspect? Because for instance, like right now, I'm sure you're aware, in several states, the Jewish community is coming out, the Satanic Temple's coming out with lawsuits to reverse a lot of these bans. I just feel like things have gotten a little out of control as far as religion goes, and how it's being injected into our normal day-to-day activities. How do we I don't know, manage that, I guess, is the right word, maybe?
Well, I guess my view is that religion and politics shouldn't coexist, and there's actual laws that if they proselytize from the pulpit, that they should be taxed. and I think we need to enforce that. There is that. I think that religion is outliving its usefulness. There was a time in human history when it was a binding force against lots of evils, both real and perceived. So it made more of a tribe. If everybody believes the same thing. I think we're evolving away from that, and I think that's healthy. Back in my younger days, I went to church, brought the kids to church, and by and large, it was a pretty open and affirming church. But then it became very clear that there was a right way for me to speak and a wrong way. And I think we're breaking out of that mold. How we keep them out of our democracy, it's
And that, by the
I'm
way,
not
that
sure I
was
have
a
an answer to
loaded.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was kind of a loaded question. I think I kind of lost that one in the middle of it, but I
Well,
mean, it is
it's
driving
a
a lot
balance.
of ours. Yeah, I mean, we're starting to see states put, under God back into schools. We're starting to see a lot of like wedge issues being introduced into areas that we didn't have to experience
We need to
before.
fight that back.
And while religion, I feel like, is starting to decline, and I've seen studies where less and less Americans are interested in it, there is a small sector that's really like ramping up and trying to weaponize it, I guess. Like, I personally have no issues on what people believe. Whatever God you want, whatever, guides you through this life, by all means. I just want you to be a good person. I just want you to be here for the right reasons. And I'm just feeling a little bit less and less as an American every time I go in and I read the news and stuff like that. So, I don't know if that's a consideration for abortion and how we approach it. Religion is a big part of a lot of people's lives, even if it is dwindling for some. I feel like it's on the rise for others, and it's another hurdle that we got to overcome.
I think the Roe v. Wade decision will uh, further alienate religious, organizations, institutions from the discussion because they are out of step with. I mean, look at the Catholic Church. The current Pope has been widely hailed as being a very liberal Pope and loosening some of the restrictions that historically the Catholic Church has had. But look what got him to that point. The widespread abuse by priests really undermine their credibility and undermine their ability to influence the society as a whole. So I think more and more of that's going to happen, and they will eventually come around and say, it's not up to us; it's up between you and your God. I think that it may not occur in my lifetime, but I think it will happen in the relatively next few generations where they're really not players. And I don't think the players now, not as much. And allowed, yes, I'll give you that. But when 75% of the American public favors abortion rights, that final 25% isn't going to be able to swing the decision.
Well, and speaking of decisions, I mean, we understand the Supreme Court and a lot of like what's going on right now in some of the cases. Like, nobody even saw Roe versus Wade being redecided. I mean, what an uproar that was, back in June, right? In May for the release, the leak or whatever.
Yeah.
Can I ask you what are your views on expanding the Supreme Court? I understand you're running for New Hampshire, but I'm just curious from somebody that's seasoned and I mean, we've done it. Congress has done it 7 times in the history of itself. Is it the right thing to do? Is it the wrong thing to do?
I'm in favor of it, and I tell you why. For 2 reasons. One is that there are 13 appellate courts, and so you could have. For me, it seems like a logical consistency to have a Supreme Court help supervise, for lack of another word, each one of those appellate courts. That's one reason. But the dominant reason for me is that we have to stop this political swings. When Democrats or Republicans take power, then everybody tries to pack the court with their own nominees. If you have more, it becomes difficult to do that. And so I do think we need to expand to 13. Do I think it'll happen? No, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And I think that when presidents can nominate 3 and get them approved, Supreme Court justice, it fundamentally changes the perspective of the court. And so if there were more people on that court, 3 being nominated would not as likely swing the court one polar extreme or another. So that would be my view on that, that we need to stop these massive swings in how we decide how we litigate all these major hot button issues.
I agree. Here in New Hampshire, we have something called the Free State Project,
Oh, God.
where, yeah, I saw the body language right there, Matt. It is talked a lot about online, and to me, it's kind of scary that you can bring 20,000 people from out of state in to completely manipulate a government. For anybody that's interested in reading about it, you should just go ahead and Google state or sorry, the Free Stater Project here in New Hampshire, and it should scare you a little bit. It should.
Yeah,
that,
the Free State Watch
such
is-
an effort.
Yeah, Free State Watch is a great website for that, because that's what they do, is they watch the free staters and what they're doing.
Is this something that the New Hampshire citizen should be not only aware of, but actively trying to fight back?
Yes.
Because it sounds like a
Yes.
noble cause, right? Like, let's go and change life for the better for all of us. We're gonna go to New Hampshire, and we're gonna make that happen. And it's just because we're a smaller state. It's easier to manipulate here. What's the dangers? Can you speak on that for a second?
I can, actually, because I've been pretty heavily involved in trying to combat them for a while. And so the context for my comments that I'm about to make is that we have 3 Republicans running for office that are fully endorsed by the Free State Project. Now, the Free State Project was originally happened because Governor Benson 20 years ago invited 20,000 people to come to New Hampshire to establish a free state situation. And the whole premise is that they want to undo government and stop things from impacting what they saw as individual liberties. And so it's given rise to some really, it'd be funny if it wasn't so tragic. The Croydon debacle. They cut the school budget in half because people didn't go vote. Now, granted, there was a snowstorm, but people didn't go vote. And they cut the school budget in half. Now, they were able to overcome that with another vote later, but that's the direction they're heading. And so, that should give us all cause. When you mentioned a few moments ago about our voting record here in town, being less than 30%, there's a manifestation of what happens when people don't vote. I mean, it's clear, concrete, well reported, everybody knows about it. And that will happen here. So, Grafton is another example that there's actually a book written about it, where they disbanded all the town regulations, including where people put their trash. Well, as a New Hampshire native, I know that if I put trash in my yard, eventually bears are going to come. We just sort of know that that's not a good thing to do. And so these guys eliminated like all funding for the dump and trash pickup and all that. And so bears are literally chasing the residents down the street. It's like, really? Then they disbanded the police department. They kept the chief, but he realizing what was happening. He went into another room at a select board meeting, took off his uniform, all his police gear, the baton and gun and all that stuff, and brought it out to the select board, left it on the table, walked home in a snowstorm in his underwear. And that's free state movement. Yeah, so that's what happens when our laws derive over time with experience. We don't always make the right decision initially, but we modify that and it becomes better. And as a consequence of that, we have this body of knowledge, institutional knowledge about what the goal is, even if we're imperfect in terms of how to get there. And so the Free State movement wants to eliminate all those kind of rules and become very extreme far-right libertarians. But interestingly enough, these same guys are against a woman's right to choose. So they want it both ways. They want to eliminate all the laws, but they also want to apply laws to the woman's body. And when I bring that up to the Free Staters, they sort of go a little, you can almost see the short circuits happening. How do they try to wrap their head around that? So the free state movement is really cancerous. Gunstock is another good example. But that's a warning to the free staters. All the free staters who ran in the primary, and actually it's a good argument for term limits, but nonetheless, when all the free staters who ran in the primary got defeated. So that the town of Laconia and the citizens of Belknap County all rose up as one. Republicans, Independents, and Democrats all said, I don't know who we are, but we know we're not them. and they
which is nice, right? When that does happen.
So the power of the vote. We talked a lot about the power of the vote. That was a clear manifestation of that power. So we need to defeat our contribution to that here in town.
It is very dangerous, and I am starting to see some people rise up trying to bring some of that here. I know a lot of them don't want any government, or at least as small as they can possibly get. Can I ask you point blank, like where do you sit on big government versus small government?
I reject the binary nature of that.
That's fair.
I would suggest I want effective government. And that means that we spend money where we need to, and with a long-term prospect of return on investment, if you will, and that investment can be soft in terms of human development, or it can be hard that our roof doesn't fall down. So I would go for effective. The way that gets phrased as small or big government would indicate that one or the other is the choice. If you want small government, then all the things that big government might bring you are completely off the table, when in fact they should be on the table. And the same would apply with big government, that we don't want unnecessarily to restrict our choices and how we manage our lives. But if you believe in all big government, then you put the blinders on that, some laws, really like the marijuana laws, they shouldn't exist.
Right.
And so, that would advocate for a smaller government. So that's why I reject this sort of binary choice between either big or small. I want effective government. I want somebody to be able to say to me, we need this law because, or we don't need this law because, and articulate a discussion that we can have in full open. When I was legislator before, I held every 2 or 3 weeks, I'd hold a meeting at the local ECLC, the Early Child Learning Center, and I'd have 4 or 5 laws I thought, bills that were germane to the public, and present that this is what the law was, and this is how I voted, and this is why I voted this way. And we ended up with having really animated discussion, not huge crowds, but good animated discussion. The point is that I was offering up to be held accountable, and in the question of big versus small, effective means that you're held accountable by the constituents, and you have to be able to justify your point of view. And I'll give you a good example of how that played out. We revised the bail law. The old bail law was such that if you're accused of a crime and put into jail, if you can make bail, you can be released, and eventually the court date would come up and be decided. But if you were not able to make bail, you were kept behind bars. So what happens is you now have an innocent person, because he hasn't been convicted, right? So you're innocent until proven guilty. You're behind bars, being charged but not convicted. And as a consequence of that, you lose your job, your family becomes estranged, the kids now have their mother or father in jail, and your life, just because somebody charged you with something, starts to degrade as if it fell off a cliff. So that didn't seem to be a reasonable thing to do. And so the judges have very little guidance in terms of how to set bail. Now, for $200, most of us can generate $200 pretty easily. But in some of the houses that I've canvassed, I know they don't have $200. I mean, just looking at the building, they can't have that. So it becomes an unequal tax, if you will, unequal burden, just because you're poor, that you don't have the money. So we changed that, and we provided guidance to the judges on how to set bail. And it was imperfect, and we sort of knew at the time that it was imperfect, but it was better than what we had. And so during one of these information sessions that I just referred to, I had a couple all the way from Dover. And no, I correct myself. They had moved from Dover, but their experience was when they lived in Dover about somebody released on bail, released under this new law. They didn't have to make bail because they didn't have the money, and broke into the house and stole a bunch of stuff. And they said, if he had to make bail, he wouldn't have done that. Well, the question is larger. So we had this animated discussion, right in front of God and everybody, and I said, well, so the alternative is this. Are you happy with that? Well, no, that's not right either. Exactly. So there we are. This horn of the dilemma or that horn. And so we chose this one, knowing we were going to have to refine it some more. And we did, and eventually the legislature took that bill up again. So, and I guess I don't know where I started with all this, but, this idea that big versus little government is a false choice. We want effective government.
I purposely gave it to you that way. I wanted to see where you fell on which side. So I'm against the idea of small government as it's projected from some of my fellow residents of here. I think the government should be effective, like you said, but the government is for us. It's to help make our lives easier, to help us be more productive, to help us raise families, to help us in so many different ways.
That's right.
And I just feel like when people are like, I'm for small government, I'm for big government, that they miss so much of that conversation that you kind of went into. There is so many different aspects of our life, whether it's managing our health care or something like that. And somebody that did work in federal government for so long, I can tell you that the people that work there are like me. Like, we go to work every day to do the best that we possibly can for our country, for our state, for wherever we're working. And when it hurts me when I hear somebody say the government doesn't know how to do X, Y, Z, because as somebody that worked behind the scenes, like for me, I was IT. And so I got to work, government data farms and that kind of stuff, long haul communications. So I get to kind of see a lot of this stuff. And I can tell you, in most cases, of course, there's nothing that's 100%. Like, people are there trying to do the best that they can. And I find it insulting when people that really don't know are out there, just passing along conversations at our local market basket or something like that. Be like, government sucks. Get it out of here. Because it's unfair. It's unfair to those people that are going to work.
And we're talking about our friends and neighbors that implement that. And I manage the safety program for Tyco, and the complexity of what has to happen on a major project. I quote this to people who come down on Biden, for what they perceive to be incoherence. And I say, look what this guy's got on his plate every single day. Have you ever managed a program? Have you ever been involved with government to actually have, implement things with a result by working through other people? One legislator having a similar discussion was reminding me of the elevator issue. And what I mean by that is that if you cut funding to a building, and the maintenance crew says that's a bad idea, and you do it anyway, if you want to have funding restored, what do? You cut out electricity to the elevator. So now everybody has to walk up 10 flights of stairs. So what's going to happen? You're going to get a lot of that. And say, we got to restore funding. Well, you're the one that wanted to, eliminate, funding for the elevator. Oh, no, I didn't expect that to happen. Right. So that's why adequate funding is required. Basic needs, that's how government can intervene.
When we get past November here, and it's coming up very quickly, what we got, like 3 weeks left or so, something like that.
Yeah.
If if let's say a lot of the Democrats here in New Hampshire are defeated, what does New Hampshire look like in the next 2 years? For most people that don't know, we vote every 2 years here in New Hampshire for our representatives. So it's a constant
Sure.
barrage of reelection stuff. But what doesn't change? What changes? Like what can people? I don't know. Like I guess what I'm angling for here is, why do we need change right now? Like why at the New Hampshire level, that is. I know that's a huge question, but I'm thinking like from the top that people can see. They go out of their houses. Are they going to see more taxes on their property? Are they going to see energy bills climb? I know it's hard to say with a crystal ball,
Well,
but are there concerns that you see coming our way that maybe the average citizen doesn't?
and there are. And maybe the best way to answer that is to break it into immediate and longer term but insidious changes. So immediate things are going to be your electric bill won't go down, it may go up more. They're already saying that they're going to need another rate increase in January or February. So, you're going to see that kind of short term stuff. And I don't mean to minimize by saying it's stuff. It's impactful. If that $500 is what allows your kid to go to school, it's a
Right.
big deal. So, you're going to see that. There'll be the school voucher system will expand massively. And so it's already, for what started to be $148,000 budget or thereabouts, is now projected to be over 70 million. Well, that's a whopping increase. I wish my pay increase was similar to that. Not
Right.
likely to be. And so you're going to see that grow more and more. So the housing disparity, the tax disparity will be just enormous. I mean, I spend $12,000 a year on my house in Barrington. Now, we knew that. We have lakefront property, so I get that, the view tax and all that. But there's a lot of people paying very similar taxes that do not have a view tax. And relative to their
I can tell
income,
you I'm paying similar taxes
and
and I don't
relative
have a
to
view.
and and then relative to their income, that burden is enormous. And I hadn't had the income that I could do that, and not many people do. So those are short-term things. Things will get more uncomfortable in the near term, next 12 to 18 months. Longer term, more insidious in my mind, all those things I just mentioned, we can correct them pretty quickly with the right legislation. But the insidious part, if nothing changes in our legislature, is that the youth will continue to leave the state. We're already getting older as an average population. And so as my own kids have moved out of state, one lives in Minnesota, another lives in Massachusetts. And the chances of them ever coming back to New Hampshire except to visit are zero. If there was a number smaller than that, it'd be that. So we're going to lose our youth, affordable housing. This new place is being built over by our new town hall, and nice houses, but the average cost of this is $650,000. That's not an entry level house. And so if you can't buy that house, what do you buy? And what are you going to command for wages? Because you need that to be able to support a house. And so businesses all of a sudden say, well, I can't get business, I can't get workers here, so I'm going to move my business to Vermont or Maine or Massachusetts because they have workers there and they've tackled the affordable housing issue. So now we have a bunch of wealthy, arguably wealthy people, but the tax rates are going to be enormous because all the workforce housing is gone elsewhere. So that's more insidious, and that is very difficult to change on the near term. It will take longer, maybe even decades to get, housing, to get septic systems, to get schools, all that is a very dystopian, bleak future, as I would see it, because of these changes that happen over the longer term. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. And it also gives me some insight to how you're viewing other things too. People are leaving the state for work and everything else. Do you think work from home is going to help that at all? I'm curious. It's something I haven't really thought about until you mentioned it, but
And I think that's really interesting. I don't think the cards have fully played out on that work at home. And my son works at home. He's a marketing director. My daughter-in-law, his wife, is a biomedical engineer. She works from home. And just talking to them about what their day is like, it's not something I would want. I tend to be a kind of a social guy anyway, as you can tell. But they're missing that sort of social context of work. And I don't know how that plays out in the future. So I'd be cautious about that. I mean, all of our manufacturing, of course, all has to happen in person. I mean, our local industry here at TurboCam, they have, I don't know, 300, lathes and CNC machines. And, you got to be there to get that. I doubt they're going to move a CNC machine in.
No, they're not going to put it in your garage.
No, I think that'd be a bad thing. I think that without those guys being able to go home to their own house, they're not going to go to that work. They're going to go elsewhere. So manufacturing, I think, will suffer. And that is kind of a linchpin of some of our economy.
Yeah, that is an unfortunate thing. When we moved here, my primary goal was to get my kids, a good education, something that they can go off and support themselves and hopefully and eventually a family and all that. But now that they're heading towards, graduation at UNH and everywhere else, they're talking about moving out of state because there's nothing here. There's nothing here. And one in particular wants to be a math teacher, something that we are in desperate need of, not just here in New Hampshire, but so many other places. The STEM jobs are very critical for our future, I think, anyway. And as you alluded to, the charter schools are in a lot of ways going to take that away from us and or at least take away the access. A lot of people like to say, well, charter schools can do so much more than public schools, yada, yada, yada. I disagree. I think we're subsidizing it. They're taking away from public schools. And people are getting lesser educations because of these charter schools. And I understand that the charter schools themselves is mostly a grift and it's all about making money and who's making that money. Right. And for people that like, maybe you're not into politics or whatever, and you're listening to this and you're like, I don't understand how this stuff works. You can boil any issue down to money. And that's why you always hear, money in politics and stuff like that. And I got some questions for you and a conversation piece about money in politics after, but the charter schools seems to be like really ramping up here in New Hampshire, at least how much is being written about online and how many people are discussing it. Can we ever eliminate that? Can we do better? Because I feel like our kids are kind of suffering because of it.
Well, they are, but I would enlarge the scope of the question a little bit.
Sure.
The consequences of the charter schools is that for most of the kids, something like 90% of the kids who claim that money that the state is making available through the voucher system were already in private schools. And so we're taking money out of the schools, giving it to these third-party schools, if you will, and so the people who remain in the public schools, they haven't gone down in number, but the funding for that school has gone down. So you're right, we do affect public schools in a very major way. But it is also another subtle piece of that, because the people who have sent their children to private schools, and full disclosure, my own kids went to St. Thomas, a private school. My daughter went to Berwick Academy for a year. So I'm one of those people that did that, but I paid for that. And so none of the money, I still paid my taxes. I lived in Rochester at the time. And so we've continued to pay that. So the societal influence and the societal cost for separating the have and the have-nots, I think is extraordinary. It's in the math class that your child was in, I'd be willing to bet there was a half a dozen kids in that class who excelled in that subject, who raised the overall performance level and expectations of everybody else in that class. And if you take your kids and others of similar motivation out of that class, then the overall performance, if you will, the overall standard tends to drop down. And how does my golf game, how does my ability to discern an argument or articulate an argument increase in quality when I associate with people who know more than I know and who are able to challenge me and take me to task? No, that's crazy, Towne. You should be, looking at it this way. That forces me to get better in my own game. And by taking your kids out of the private, out of the public schools, we start to dilute that. The $4,500, $5,000 that the state is contributing towards that isn't generally enough to fully fund that tuition in another school. My daughter's Burke education was $11,000 a year. We had the money. Most do not. That $4,500 would have certainly helped, but it wouldn't have solved it. I still would have had to come up with $6,000 or $7,000 more. So my point being is that we take out of the public resources not only the money, but also a lot of the kids who could help make a big difference.
I mean, yeah, I fully agree with that. There's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts, people trying to get kids into these schools versus these schools. A year ago, my daughter had gone back to 8th grade at the time. And the vice principal had left and went to another school. She was great, but she was just offered more money, and we couldn't keep. And there were several teachers. I mean, that was the vice principal or assistant principal. We're struggling to keep really good educators, like people that care, people that are going to bring our kids, our next generation, to leadership positions and and other big things, right?
Well,
But they're leaving, and I don't know how we fix this.
I need to disagree in that the teachers that we have are doing yeoman's work. They're doing under incredible attack from this whole critical race theory piece.
Yes.
And funding issues, and kids coming in. And I have a whole bevy of close friends who are teachers, and what they tell me from experience in the classroom is that kids are coming to school without meals, without being fed. They come to school with poor hygiene. They come to school wholly unprepared to spend a day to do that. And Governor Sununu dragged his feet and missed the deadline for subsidized school lunches from the feds. Feds are the ones who give that money, but you got to apply for it. He didn't apply for it. So the school cafeterias all over the state now are scrambling, trying to figure out how they're going to make up and give kids who otherwise wouldn't have a meal to get a meal. So that's the context that the teachers are working in with that. What is happening, to your point, is that experienced teachers are tending to have more marketable skills because everybody's looking for teachers. And so we end up populating classrooms with brand new teachers. Now everybody's brand new at some point in their profession. So I'm not raining on that. But I am saying that the experience where you learn from older mentors, from experienced teachers, say, yeah, I ran into that when I was a young teacher. This is the way I dealt with it. That sort of mentoring tends to go away. And that's, as I mentioned before, it's an insidious cost. Because how do you measure that? How do you measure mentoring? I don't know how you measure that. I know it exists. I've been a mentor, and I've been mentored. So I know what it's like if we take experienced teachers out of the classroom. Well, we don't take them, they leave, and they go to a state that appreciates them. And right now, we don't appreciate the experience that we're losing out the door. And I shout out to all the teachers who stay here. God bless you. And
I appreciate them. I appreciate them very much. I wish we could do it in a different way too. It just feel like those teachers just don't have the tools that they need right now. And I feel like they're taking quite a beating from a certain part of the community. They're disappointed, they're tired, and in some cases they're desperate. Whether it's just buying crayons or pencils for their classroom, or or just having a regular conversation with a parent, sometimes it's tough. I mean, here in New Hampshire, I don't know how we resolve this. I mean, I just use an anecdotal, example from earlier, where I saw literally from our middle school experience walk out and take it somewhere else. Those are some of our best teachers, and we lost them. And most people didn't even say anything. Most people couldn't have been bothered to care.
Yeah.
And it blew me away that people were okay with that. I mean, maybe they weren't, maybe I just didn't see it. I don't want to say for sure, but from my perspective, it kind of hurt.
It does. And you end up with the soundbite mentality again. When they say, well, they have all summer off. It's cushy life. No,
I
it
couldn't
isn't.
disagree more with anybody that says that, because I have an aunt in Strafford County, and she's she's up in the administration, and so she's seen it from the top. I have a daughter that's getting ready to go into education potentially, and and a lot of times we have those conversations, and it's kind of scary because the thought of being here and working for less, or having to deal with more potential either violence in the classroom, whether it's school shooting drills, or teachers having to deal with parents that are irate because XYZ. I don't know, it just seems like a lot of stuff to deal with when you're just trying to teach kids. I don't
Well,
know if
it
New
is.
Hampshire has anything that they want to do and help those teachers out, any
Well,
kind of
right now,
legislation.
there isn't. The teachers are perceived as the enemy by the Republican Party and the Libertarian Party. I mean, how do you keep a population under control? It's
Well,
not
you
by
keep them
educating
dumb.
them. You keep them dumb.
Yeah.
And so this plays directly into their hands. A class size of 30 would be fine for a Republican. It's not for those of us who value education. This whole mainstreaming of children who are differently able, when they come to the classroom, it's great that they're there, but they require resources. And so the
Yeah.
paraprofessionals and the like, we need to invest in that future. And it does. I'm going to use this subject to sort of segue a little bit into how we fund education and tax issue in general, because I know I'll be routinely attacked for tax and spend.
No, I
Democrat.
think this is an important conversation and something I wanted to lean towards anyway. So please go right ahead.
Okay. Well, I held two seminars. I sponsored John Tobin from the New Hampshire Fair Funding organization, Fair School Funding. And for those of you who watch this, I would go onto their website, just Google School Fair Funding. You'll come up with John Tobin and Andrew Valinsky. So I actually still have their presentation on my laptop as well. But the premise of the whole thing is that the overall tax burden in New Hampshire is really not any different than any other state of our size and services. So we're actually in the middle of the pack. So this idea that somehow we have fewer taxes is absolutely incorrect. We just pay our taxes in different ways. And one of those big ways, obviously, is the property tax. And we sort of gently alluded to it a moment ago. But those towns that have a property poor, of which Barrington is one, and what I mean by that is the overall valuation of property in that town is less than the average, then in order to capture the amount of money it takes to educate our students, which in Barrington is around $14,000 a year per student, then we have to have high tax rates. And so if we had more valuable property, Greenland, Portsmouth, Moultonborough, Alton, we would have these mansions, they're bearing more of that tax burden, but so their tax rate can be lower. So it isn't that we're saving any money by having this property tax burden. We're just deciding to put all that burden on property owners. If we had a more broad-based approach to this, then it would be more equitably distributed. And there is at least 3 court decisions, Climate 1 and 2, and the one in Cheshire, have all, the court has all ruled on that, saying that the way we're raising money for schools is unconstitutional. And our founders on the New Hampshire Constitution had that exactly right. It is a state responsibility. So by putting that back on the towns, we are not in compliance with our own constitution, and we make this uneven landscape very pronounced for property poor towns and property rich towns. So this inequity is going to continue to haunt us until we fix it.
Can I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into that predicament that we're in. A lot of times I read our local Facebook pages and stuff like that. This is how I stay connected to our town, because I don't work in the town. I don't like go to school here or anything. I'm a stay-at-home dad. So I get mine through social media. And a lot of the things I see is, I'll just give you an example. Burger King came into our town, and there was a part of our town that absolutely did not want Burger King in our town. They wanted to keep our town small. They wanted our country store to be the primary location for people to shop at. They really don't want to see growth in some of these towns, and I happen to live in one of them. Is this a problem, do you see? And how do we convince people, if it is, that it's okay to expand, so our properties do go up, so our funding is, relatable to fellow cities?
Well, now, right out of the gate, I need to disallow something that you mentioned, and that is
Sure.
that we have a choice about whether or not we grow. We don't have a choice. You look around us. I mean, all the towns that from the water's edge in Portsmouth, going west, all the towns are getting progressively built out. So Greenland and Dover and Rochester, Exeter, name your town, are all quickly becoming fully developed. So
Right.
where are they going to go? They're going to go to a town that has a huge amount of landmass. I know because I walked most of it. They're going to go there because the land is available. Not that it's cheap, but that it's available. So the people that move out here, if they can afford the land, they can also afford often the $650,000 house that I alluded to a little bit ago. And so we are going to grow. So the question is not whether we are not going to grow or not, but the question should be, how do we do it in a way that we preserve our small town flavor? And,
Okay, that's
so I became good friends with a woman, Ivy Vaughn, who was a regional planner when I was in the legislature, which is getting back to the question why I'm running, because I get to rub elbows with a lot of people who know a lot more about stuff than I know. And she was one of them, and she's a professional city planner. And so we'd have lunch together, and I just shut up and let her talk. And she would talk about developing downtowns in a way that is pedestrian friendly, that has bike paths, that has things that would attract people to them, workforce housing. And something particularly dear to me is having mixed generational housing. So you now have the older and working folks and children all sort of cohabiting in the same general area. And that it's been proven over and over again, it's healthy for everybody in that equation. And we don't do that. We have these tracts of land where people have their own little silos of existence. And many times, and I've seen that repeatedly when I canvass, many times they don't even know who the neighbor is, much less having kind of common ground with them. So what Ivy would say is we need to go up, not out. And so the tax burden can be expressed as a measure of footage on a road. If you have more frontage on a road, your land is more valuable and more expensive. But it's also more for the town to maintain, because you have more roads to do, there are more septic to do, utilities, all have to go further out into the hinterlands. But if you have it more densely populated, particularly with this mixed generational housing, that the cost to the town is much less. And but again, we it's planning. So when we say, do we want to be big or small? It's not the question. The question is, what are we doing now to try to plan for that? Now, I'll give the current select board, particularly Dan Mintrack and Joyce Capiello and Robert Gibson, the they've had the foresight to start to do some of, establishing committees, like there's an energy committee and there's a housing committee. They're doing that now to try to get ahead of that curve. But we're 20 years behind that curve.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
And so we got to get on top of that. So when people say, you just want to make this into Massachusetts.
Yeah, I guess I don't know how to bring those people along. I don't know how to get them to understand. Like you said, we are going to develop. And for anybody that's wondering, we did get the Burger King, by the way. But we're still a very tiny town. We only have one intersection in our town, with a light. I just, some of the people that have grown up here and lived here their entire lives, 30, 40, 50, 60 years and plus, change is hard. And I don't know how to reach those people and they can understand that there is value for them by putting a Burger King in this town section, because more people will want to live here, which raises our housing prices, which gives more money to our school and other activities. And I just feel like a lot of people have just turned off their ears, and they're so set. And it makes me sad that people don't want to have conversations anymore about little things like this, because it turns into a big thing and everybody suffers a little bit, even if it's not like a huge, like, I know some people will be like, what, he's just talking about Burger King, it's not a big deal, but it's the stepping stone to the much larger situation of expansion and bringing in those commercial funds. And our county really doesn't have a lot of commercial funds in comparison to residential. And so I just feel like a lot of people are missing that opportunity, which kind of leads me to another point, if you don't
Can
mind
I
going
jump
with
in?
me. Yeah, please go for it.
I want to just talk a little bit. We talked about taxes and property taxes. I've had conversations with a number of businessmen who are really conflicted as a group. And so a few years ago, there was a survey of business people across state New Hampshire. I wish I could cite the source. I'm not able to do that. Can't recall it. But the survey was asking, name 5 things that are most important to you as a business person. And interestingly enough, nowhere in that top 5 list did lower taxes come up as an item. What they wanted was a stable regulatory environment. They wanted a stable tax structure. And their whole mantra on all of these things was stability, that they could plan for, work the business around just about any tax structure, but it had to be the same, roughly the same year over year going forward. These wide swings in political philosophy, cause them problems because the prices go high, the prices go low, and in the end, it's really just all our money anyway, because we buy the product. So the business guy is only a conduit, if you will, for making the product that we then buy and give him the money for. And the tax structure really influences what that price is. But we have to acknowledge that it's our money, that's going for that. And that money supports, as you say, schools and roads and things that they need to have, but really inappropriate for Tobocan to have its own fire department, to have its own health service, to have its own, fill in the blank. So the idea of taxes being bad for business, again, is incorrectly stated. And it's more important that the taxes be stable and predictable and methodical. I mean, that's what drives business. What drives them crazy is to have these, whoops.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, here's a bill for you.
Yeah,
you weren't
exactly.
expecting.
Yeah, it's such as the electric rates.
Right.
Anyway,
I've noticed this is not really a question, but since August 1st, I have seen more houses go up for sale in my area that I do a lot of driving in than I've ever seen before. Even with housing rates going up and making it more difficult to buy. I don't know if that's gonna I don't know if the electrical bill here is going to be any kind of impact here at a larger scale, or if I'm just seeing onesies and twosies move out. And I don't even know if they're moving because of that. I don't know. Has anybody given you feedback? I'm just curious. Has anybody given you feedback of how that affects them?
Well, feedback on, angst over the doubling of the electric rates affects everybody I've talked to, and they're all angry about it. I went to a meeting down in Brentwood a couple of weeks ago where the PUC came down to present, here are some alternatives how to deal with your electric rates. And so they went through the presentation, but the crowd was angry. There was probably 100 people in that crowd, and they came loaded for bear. And they said, how do we get in this situation? Why are we doing this? I mean, why is this such a big surprise to the Public Utilities Commission? Where have you guys been? And so that was the kind of question that was being asked. And the PUC guy, the consumer advocate, said, we were told by the Executive Council and the governor that the market would figure it out. Well, guess what? They did. And you're paying it.
Yeah. I asked that because honestly, of all the things I have mentioned of places I read news and stuff, just a lot of people aren't writing about it online. I see it as like a comment here and a comment there, but I'm not seeing the boil, where people collectively say enough's enough and this is what we're going to do about it. So I've just wondered from your perspective, since you're out there canvassing and you're talking to people, if it is a major deal.
Yeah, it is. Everybody I talk to is angry about that.
That is just wild. Do you think there's any way forward out of this? I mean, do we see this lower ever, in your opinion?
Using that, we can't do the same thing and expect a different result, right? So we have to do something different. And the different thing to do is sustainable energy. And solar has been cheaper than fuel oil for some time now. Greece just went 100% renewable energy for, I think, 2 days. Hawaii. California went for a half an hour, the entire state on renewable energy. So we know that what to do. But are we going to get that from the current regime? No, we're not.
No, so I feel like they're getting their pockets are being lined or something. I don't know. It all comes down to money. Somebody's getting a contribution somewhere. Somebody's rubbing shoulders with family members. I feel like, I don't know. I'm just an angry constituent. but I mean, I'm not gonna get hung on the electric bill. We have so many more things to be worried about as a population. Matt, I know that we're running towards the end of this. Where can people? Do you have more time, or I don't know where we sit, but
yeah, I probably ought to think about wrapping that up at some point.
Yeah, I think this is a good opportunity to do that. I hope that we get to do this again in the future, but even face to face, I'll finish the studio and hopefully get you over here. But where can people get activated? Where can people learn more, not only about you, but the Democratic platform, or like what the agenda is going to be? Please tell people where they can get more information, and please vote.
Well, if there's lots of information. A cautionary note is anything on social media, you want to make sure that if a view is expressed by any of the candidates, that you challenge that with sources, that you find out what their source is. And they should be able to give that to you, at least a rationale for thinking what they think. If it starts to sound and feel like an ideologue, I'm going to take this template of how the world is and apply it to every situation that I might encounter, then you should be really cautious about that person. And right now, that is sort of part and parcel of the Republican and the Free Staters. So where can they get information? One is I invite them to email me. I answer all non-bot emails. So if a machine generated the email, I won't answer that. But if you send me an email, meaning you as a constituent, then I answer 100% of those. So you're welcome to do that. In-Depth New Hampshire is a local publication that I think is tuned in to the local situations. And it admittedly is probably a little left-leaning, but you can also make the case that they're left-leaning because they're rational. And I know how that's going to be taken by some of your listeners. But nevertheless, I would frequent theirs. Jack Gale does an FYI Barrington. It just talks about community events, and it's not partisan. So I would invite you to follow FYI Barrington. And the Yeah, one of the things I like about Jack saying, he tells you about opportunities to get involved with the town government, planning committees, like they have an energy committee, and several friends who are heavily involved in energy industry, if you will, are part of that committee. So if you want to know more about that and you want to contribute, get involved with any of the town committees. Strongly advocate for that. Select board meetings can be excruciatingly painful for that it's not really all that sexy, but they do have a lot of really interesting information. And I would reach out to Joyce Capiello and Dan Mantrick and Robert, and get them to respond to your questions, and they will. So those are among the areas. My general view about informing my opinions is I read lots of different material. So I read the London Times, I read New York Times on a regular basis, maybe not every day, but most days. I watch 2 hours worth of news a day, from public news and public TV, as well as CBS and a few of the smattering of the others, never Fox News. So there's lots of other avenues for that. My wife is involved with the local library in a heavily way, so she informs me about what's going on with that. My point is many points of contact, and rather than making it seem like a burden, it's really fascinating how things happen. So allow yourself to be part of the process in a way that, oh damn, now I understand. And then the little, remember the first time you first solved a quadratic equation, back in high school? It's like, oh, I get it.
But
so, but you can say, I solved that. I did it. I understand now. And that sort of enlightenment is really powerful. So it's kind of a longer answer to your question.
I'm very grateful that you sat down with me and kind of dove into these subjects. I know they're hard, and I maybe in some cases for listeners, we didn't dive in deep enough, but we will in the future. We can do this again.
Absolutely.
Yes, this was a lot of fun. Yeah, well, I hope so, and I wish you the very best on the campaign, and I'll see you and hopefully everybody else on voting day. It's coming up November 8th, right?
It is November 8th, from 8 in the morning to 7 at night. You see me with my little sign. So
I'll be there bringing my whole family in for that vote too.
All right.
So,
sounds great. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome. Matt Towne, everybody. Thank you. This is another one.